The world of international relations, of geopolitics, has gone through a quantum leap. A leap similar to the leap in understanding between classical physics and quantum mechanics. It's this conceptual change that is the one big takeaway I think viewers should take from Vladimir Putin's speech at Valdai in 2025, part of a 4-hour session. And in this video, I'm going to explain to you why this is the one big takeaway, the two big warnings that Vladimir Putin said, and the one way you can cut through hours of commentary and fluff on YouTube to get to the absolute core essentials of what Vladimir Putin said at Valdai in 2025. My name's Jeff Rich. This is The Burning Archive, where I talk about world history, culture, and politics, and try to bring a historical perspective and my own experience as a former government official, indeed a former speechwriter, quite relevant to today's video, to the discussion of these events. Now, Vladimir Putin every year goes to the Valdai Club, where he talks about the big issues in international relations. And at this year's Valdai Club, he spoke about a lot of issues, but it's really 2 sentences almost in his speech that I really want to focus our attention on. Today's world is an exceptionally complex, multifaceted system. To properly describe and comprehend it, simple laws of logic, cause and effect relationships, and the patterns arising from them are insufficient. What is needed here is a philosophy of complexity, something akin to quantum mechanics, which is wiser and in some ways more complex than classical physics. That is reading from the official translation of the Kremlin website of Vladimir Putin's speech. You might get different versions on various YouTube auto translations out there, but it's these 2 things which talk about a different way of thinking about international relations, geopolitics, world history, and to match the actual change in the nature and the relationships and the nature of power flows and the balance of power around the world, the nature of the polycentric or multipolar world. That is what Vladimir Putin focused on most in the speech. And I'll get a little bit more to some of the content of the speech in a second, but what I really, and because there were some really interesting issues discussed, including, as I mentioned before, 2 rather important warnings, the focus I really want to focus on is this mindset shift from a world of classical physics to a world of quantum mechanics. It's a way of thinking about international relations, which is different to patterns of thinking in the Western mainstream media, in the Western alternative media, but especially also in the models of realist international relations that are so prevalent. What is the difference between quantum mechanics and classical physics? Well, there's a difference between, and I'll just go through this briefly, but there's a difference between determinism and probability. Classical physics is deterministic. You know where everything starts and you can predict where it will go. In quantum mechanics, it's much more probabilistic and predictions are very difficult. It's really very hard to know exactly what the specific location of any particular particle is, rather like trying to understand Donald Trump's position on any particular issue. There's a difference between continuous and discrete quantities. In classical physics, you deal with continuous variables like power, say. But in quantum mechanics, you have variable things that change in sudden ramps rather than smooth, sudden steps rather than smooth changes. There's differences in predictability and measurement, and differences in the wave-particle duality. Classical physics treats objects as either waves or particles, but not both. Quantum mechanics sees entities as both waves and particles. And finally, there's a difference in scope. So it's a different way of describing how all the players of the international system interact. There's no sense in which it's a hegemonic world, a great power world. It's a world that is dramatically different. And in his speech, Vladimir Putin goes into a little bit more detail about these characteristics of the complex international system. He says it's a more creative and open space for foreign policy where nothing is predetermined. He says there's high dynamism with rapid and often sudden changes that require immediate real-time reactions. It's a more democratic system where there's a large number of countries influencing global events. It's no longer a great power world, a G2 world, a G7 world, unipolar world. There are many particles and waves out there that are influencing events. And there's also increased importance of cultural, historical and civilizational specificity. It's not just economics and power, it's also culture, which affects the dynamics of the players in the system. So in this complex system, above all, there is a need for consensus. Not uniformity, but consensus where viable solutions can require agreements that satisfy most, if not all, parties, and an inseparable link between opportunities and dangers. And achieving balance is essential, but also involves significant risk. So you can see the affinity there between aspects of the ideas, or the differences between classical physics and quantum mechanics in applying those same metaphors, if you like, to your way of thinking about geopolitics and international relations. And that is the core of what Vladimir Putin said in his speech. It's also something which implicitly he was saying the West, especially America, the home of realist international thinking, has not quite caught up with the reality of these changes. Both Europe and the United States haven't really caught up with these new quantum dynamics of the international system. And this is where Vladimir Putin's warnings come in. But let me first just give you a quick summary of the other topics of the discussion. He talked about these characteristics of the complex international system. He talked about the collapse of Western hegemony. He talked about Russia's resilience and essential role in the global system. The nature of diplomacy. He expected, it was a hopeful speech in some ways, in which he said there, in this new complex world, he expects a renaissance of the art of diplomacy, but in new institutions like the SCO, like BRICS, and perhaps like a reformed United Nations. He talked about indivisible security and specifics of the Ukraine conflict, and he talked about how the world has changed fundamentally. The world majority, those many other countries, not just Russia and China, not just India, but all the other countries of the world who make up the global majority, are increasingly demanding that there be substantial reform to the United Nations, and that the West has degraded the United Nations. And he speaks about the path forward. It was a very wide-ranging speech, and that was just 45 minutes of the 4-hour session. I've actually got a briefing package over at my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. There's a link in the video description below and in the pinned comment. So why not head over there and save yourself hours listening to second-hand versions of this and get my entire briefing package, and you'll be able to cut through a lot of the noise and really understand the importance and the deeper meaning of this speech at Valdai. As I said, there were two significant warnings in the speech. The first key warning was to Europe, and that warning was to say that Russia has been listening to all the comments about the militarization of Europe. He even made a sort of little symbol with his hand, a gesture with his hand like that, and said, we are listening to what you're saying and there may need to be a response. And the second key warning was really for the United States of America. It occurred not in the main speech, but which in the discussion session, the 3-hour discussion question and answer session, in which, you know, some popular geopolitical commentators, including Glenn Deason, Anatole Lieven and others asked questions. Even Tara Reid, a former member of Joe Biden's office, notoriously asked a question in the audience. But in this 3-hour question, and by the way, I have a complete time-stamped breakdown of that entire 3-hour session, so you can go to jeffrich.substack, get my briefing package, and save yourself a lot of time and a lot of hassle to follow up all the key things of this really quite important speech and forum. But in that question and answer section of the session, Vladimir Putin also gave a warning to the United States. He said, if Tomahawk weapons, and we've heard General Keith Kellogg refer to this in recent days, if Tomahawk weapons, which of course are nuclear-capable weapons, are provided to Ukraine, it will be a qualitative leap, a qualitative escalation and deterioration in the relationships, in the nature of the conflict, the direct conflict between Russia and the United States, and Russia will need to provide appropriate responses. So 2 warnings and one really big idea from this speech, the idea of a quantum leap in international relations, where we all really need to change our thinking. Vladimir Putin also didn't just talk about it conceptually, he talked about the practical realities of what it is to be a leading diplomat, a leading world figure, conducting diplomacy in these circumstances. And I can point you to all of that material over at the best source for getting a real insight into Vladimir Putin's annual talk at the Valdai Forum, including my previous analyses of his Valdai speeches, which I've done here on the Burning Archive YouTube channel, and even the complete text of the poems that were contained in the book that Vladimir Putin carried out on stage, a poem by Alexander Pushkin about the famous battle of Borodino in 1812, when the European army, the revolutionary ideological army of Napoleon Bonaparte, attempted to invade Russia. And of course, Borodino was a key turning point, not the final turning point, but a key turning point in Russia's resilience and its ultimate liberation of Europe from Napoleon by 1814. So do head over to jeffrich.substack.com, become a paid subscriber there, and you'll get full access to my briefing package on the Vladimir Putin's 2025 Valdai Club speech and discussion. All those extras, including the timestamp guide to the discussion session, that will save you really hours in terms of getting the most out of this important event. Don't waste your time watching, sloppy summaries of it on other YouTube channels. Head over to jeffrich.substack.com. There's a link in the video description below and in the pinned comment, and I'll be back soon with another video real soon. Thanks for watching.